My name is Sarah Carell, and we are here to discuss wounds to wisdom, healing through veteran and first responder narratives. We're doing a series here. Want to do a shout out to Denny Caballero for producing this segment. And what we are doing is we have a 29 author collaborative book where our protectors are sharing their stories. That's veterans and first responders. And they're sharing their stories of trauma and their journey to healing and resilience. And we want to reach our protectors who are suffering in silence. They're stuck. And our hope is that through these stories, they can get the courage to take that step to healing. So tonight, we get to talk to David Berez. David is a retired police officer and positive psychology practitioner. And David, really great to hear. Also, actually, I want to mention your book. You are the author of A Resilient Life, A Cop's Journey in Pursuit of Purpose. So, David, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, and I look forward to our conversation to promote our new book.
Yes. So I would love to hear a little bit about your childhood. And what was it in your childhood that gave you the desire to want to be a police officer?
So there were a few things that actually took me down that route. And when I was younger and then coming into my teen years, my parents had a very tumultuous relationship. And police, unfortunately, were called to the house several times. And so I, through that experience, got to understand what they do and how they help people. And I truly saw from that moment of a young child, not the officer that was giving out, candy on a street corner at a fair or at an event where you meet the police at the police station. I saw the work that they did for my family. And I knew at that time that I wanted to be able to give that back to somebody else, some other kid that was struggling. And I was just so grateful to understand the great work that police officers do, work that nobody really sees unless you've had that interaction with them personally.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think through the power of our story and hearing so many law enforcement officers' stories, there really is a theme of something happening in the childhood, those childhood years that they grow up and they want to be protectors. They want to help other people. And those are really the themes and the patterns that I have been seeing with the law enforcement officers that I'm connected with. And now hearing you bring that up again too, it's definitely common. And so moving on then, how did you start getting into law enforcement? What was your next steps?
It was actually a bit of an accidental journey. And when I went to college, I should go back before that a little bit. From the time I was 14 in high school, I was a volunteer EMT at the local rescue squad. That was partly to get myself out of the house and away from the stuff that was going on at home. But it also gave me a purpose. It gave me a mission. It gave me a way to care for people in a way that I could do at 14, up through 16 and 18 years old, that the average person doesn't really have the opportunity to. And it was a great entry point into emergency services as a volunteer. And when I went away to college, I wanted to be a doctor because when I was a young child, 7 years old, I had my tonsils and adenoids removed. After the first 7 years of my life were really, stricken with that kind of head colds and infections and all kinds of stuff. So I had my tonsils and adenoids removed, and I was like, damn, I want to be a doctor. I want to help kids, which is the same thing I saw from law enforcement. But when I got to college, I took my first semester of science classes, the main one being botany, the study of plant cells. And I realized that this is not for me. It was not a class that I passed, and it was not going, and it was a clear representation that moving forward in the sciences wasn't going to work out at that stage of my life. So I had to recalibrate. And when I came home for winter break, I had a conversation with a good friend named Todd, who was a police officer in the town I grew up in. And he didn't realize that at the time, but all the stories, everything he was telling me, the conversations we had, he convinced me to go into law enforcement. And I went back early before second semester freshman year, changed all my classes from science classes to criminal justice courses. And much to the surprise of my mom when she got the bill for the spring semester and had no idea that happened. And we had a conversation about how that was going to be different for me because science wasn't going to be my path, and helping other people through this avenue was going to be. So that's what got me into it originally. And then when I graduated college, I ended up going to the New York City Medical Examiner's Office for an internship, kind of combining that science and EMS background that I love so much with my new passion for law enforcement. And it set me on the track going forward into my professional career of being a police officer.
Oh, excellent. So, okay, so then moving forward, I would love for you to share, first off, you being a retired law enforcement officer. So you had all those years. When you look back, first off, what did you love about it? When you think about those times, what did you love about having a career in law enforcement? And then we'll get into the hard stories. What was tough? Where did you hit that day? And then we'll go from there. So what did you love about it?
So for me, I think my favorite part was being able to serve the community I grew up in. And it was very special to be able to do that from the platform of the badge and the uniform, because you are given the authority to do things, to serve people in a way that you can't do otherwise. And that authority comes with a lot of weight, and it comes with a lot of responsibility. And as a young kid, I got hired full time at the age of 24. Other than my own personal experiences at home, I didn't have a ton of life experience. And it was very humbling to walk into somebody else's home to teach them or to tell them or to work with them, to work through the struggles that they were having inside their own house. But I had the life experience of my own childhood to be able to pull forward into that scenario. So when I was able to give back, especially to the people in my own community, it was very impactful and important for me. And throughout my career, I was always one of the community policing guys, even though we didn't have a specific community policing unit. And I always made sure that I was the face of the brand for the agency that saw the good that our agency could do. Not because I felt I was the guy that was doing the good. It wasn't about me, but it was about making sure the agency was seen in a way that the community respected, and that we weren't just out there writing tickets and locking up people on the weekends. Because yes, that's a huge part of the job, law enforcement, right? But the fact that we were out there as community helpers and serving those that needed it the most was an important piece of the job for me. And I wanted to make sure our agency was represented that way.
Excellent. And then, so this is something that's close to your heart that you were talking about, that it was a way to connect with the community, to shine, a good impression on your organization. It was a way to give back, like you had shared before. So this is something that connected with you, just even heart-wise. This was, your passion. This is where you fit. But then, of course, we all know that being a law enforcement officer, you see people on their worst day every day. I mean, just all the trauma, the cumulative trauma. Can you talk about either a moment, a time, or a season where you feel like you really hit that wall?
So for me, I was never involved in a critical incident in the way some of our other authors have been involved, where it's a complete demarcation in their career where life changed from that moment going forward. For me, I would use exactly the words you just said as cumulative events that are the proverbial death by 1,000 cuts, and that builds up over time. And there's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score that talks about how everything that goes on physically in your body relates to the emotional experiences that you have. And that buildup over time does bubble over it at some point. And that's what happened to me. It was early in 2019 when a very insignificant incident occurred with with my body camera. It had broken, like physically broken, and I was asked to write a report about that. And I did. It wasn't good enough for the powers that be. It was an opportunity for them to go after me hard on something, try to push me out the door. And the organizational trauma that I experienced from that incident, combined with several other things that had occurred over my career, what superseded the traumas that I dealt with on the street. And sadly, there's a lot of people, a lot of police officers that will go out there and say, I was more worried about getting stabbed in the back inside of the building than I was shot in the face outside of it. And organizational trauma is real, and there's science to show and research to show where organizational trauma and lack of support actually causes more stress responses, PTSD, and cardiovascular disease than the job itself. And it's unfortunate, and that's what happened to me. So 2019 was kind of my breaking point. And by January 1st, 2020, I put in my papers for 20 plus years and retired at that time.
You know what, David, I keep hearing that across the board, that you could have the job that you had with so much trauma, and yet when it is that organizational trauma, the betrayal, way where you did not feel supported or protected, or can you break that down? What happens to a person? What happened to you when you experience that? Is it a breaking down of confidence, or tell me what that looks like in real time?
So the short answer is yes, all of the above. And confidence is a big issue. Self-efficacy, when you cannot find a way to put forward your best effort and where it's appreciated by others and there's success in that effort, certainly becomes an issue. And then you lose self-determination, right? When self-efficacy kind of goes away, and that the skill that you thought you had to produce a certain outcome is pushed back on and doesn't exist for you anymore, self-determination then starts to fall off behind that. So once you start losing those pieces of your own agency, that's where depression starts to set in. Then depression starts the cardiovascular issues, and it's a downward spiral for sure. But a lot of it, unfortunately, comes back to the organizational trauma. And there's a professor out of University of Buffalo, Dr. Violante, who does a lot of research on exactly what we're talking about. And he's come up with in his studies that the organizational trauma actually supersedes the trauma on the street for these self-harm and self-destructive issues.
I'll tell you, I have seen that clear as a bell over the last 4 years in the power of our story. With all the people that come in and share their story, it's always about the organizational betrayal that seems to be the most traumatic for people. Can you please just explain what self-efficacy means? Because if that's where you lose your determination, what exactly does that mean?
So self-efficacy is the concept of understanding that you are able to affect a change in what you're doing. So if you can be effective in the work that you're doing for a positive outcome, then it will drive you to do more of that. So when you realize that your ability to affect work from a positive perspective has been taken away from you, there's no drive left. There's no agency in your work where you feel that you can go forward and be worth anything. So when you lose that self-worth and you don't feel that you're adding value back to the agency, and the agency doesn't seem to be adding value to your world, everything starts to spiral down, and it leads to these depressive states. And hopefully there's ways that there's tools that you can work on and work with to overcome that if you recognize it's happening. But quite often we don't recognize it until it's too late. And that depressive state is sometimes unrecoverable because we lose ourselves in those moments.
So well said.
But
and you just have to...
The one thing important to add, the one thing that's important to add is it shouldn't be the end. If you get into that space and you do spiral down and you do get into a depression, it's important to know it is recoverable, but it's not recoverable if you take permanent action on that temporary situation. So always know that there's hope. Always keep that bit of optimism. Always look up towards what could be next in the future, even if it wasn't what you originally thought it would be. So there is something else there out for you, and you aren't the job, and the job isn't you. So you got to separate the two, and you got to identify your true why, your true north, and then work towards that if law enforcement or your first responder position or job is not going to be, long term for you.
So well said. I really appreciate you sharing that. Can you share your recovery process from that time when you struggled with the organizational betrayal?
So I actually didn't recover from it until I retired. I retired holding on to those grudges, holding on to those moments, and to that feeling that I didn't belong there anymore, and which was part of the reason that I did retire. And then in that short span, I retired January 1st of 2020. And following my retirement, we had the pandemic and we had civil unrest. And in that process, I lost two good friends to suicide, both police officers. And I recognized that I was in trouble too. And I recognized that, but not for them, I may have been their statistic. And their suicides made me or allowed me to take stock of my own situation, recalibrate, and understand what I can do to try to prevent people from taking those actions, against themselves. Where I found solace was being able to give back and continue to serve. But instead of serving the community at large, it was my personal community of my law enforcement family. And finding that as my true north, my why is service, I found another way to do that outside of the uniform and beyond the badge. And that was to give back to my own people. It was to understand that these resiliency tools through positive psychology are the fix to get those out of these non-therapeutic states and to be thriving again, to find happiness, to find gratitude, and to smile once in a while. And then going from there is that service to others is what brought me along the journey with them to my own recovery, my own happiness.
That's great. There's so much wisdom in everything that you have just shared. So tangible and clear. Let me ask you something, David. If you could imagine yourself as a younger man, a younger David, and you could have been prepped somehow to understand what was happening, what would you tell yourself? How would you mentor yourself?
I think that there's certain ways through positive psychology, which is, I keep saying that it's kind of my new world, that you can see optimism, you can see hope there. If you can look beyond the moment and then work and build a path to that next moment, build new habits that get you to that next moment, that'll pull you out of the rut that you're in. And nowhere, wherever you are in that moment, good or bad, quite frankly, is never permanent. So if you're in a bad spot and you want to get out of that, there's ways. You're going to have to change your situation, because doing the same thing over and over again is not going to change the outcome. If you are, taking classes that aren't productive towards the job that you want at your career, it's not going to change things for you. If you are under the same boss that keeps holding you back, it's not going to do better for you. You got to change your situation. And that may even be getting out of the field. So if there's something within the field that you can't attain, but that piece of it is the best part, like if you're an agency that's got aviation and you want to be a pilot, but they won't put you in aviation and being a pilot is for you, well, get the heck out of law enforcement and go get your pilot's license and go work on the private side. There's ways to attain your goals. It doesn't have to be in a badge and a uniform. And I think that's what I would tell my younger self is, when things aren't working out for you in the moment, change your situation. Know that there's an optimistic view. There's a way, there's a path to get you to that next place, but you have to find it, and it's not where you're currently at.
That's great. You're giving people permission to actually change if it's not working where they're at, right? And sometimes we need that, somebody to actually voice it. It almost makes us feel like we have permission to move on. And that can be a very scary thing. I'm sure if you haven't hit retirement yet, and maybe that's kind of your goal, I would imagine that's hard, isn't it? It's hard to move on if you're hoping to retire.
It's extremely difficult because, finances are a big deal in our life, right? Like we have bills to pay. We have families to feed. We have kids that want to go to college. And My son just started driving. He wants gas in the car. So we have to find ways to support ourselves and our families. And when you have that, I don't like the phrase, but that golden parachute at the end of your career with your pension and your benefits, it's very difficult to walk away from all that when you're 15 years in, 20 years in, before you can get those benefits and move on to something else and start all over again. But if you're not here to receive those benefits, they're not worth anything. So it's very important that you find what makes you feel happy, what makes you, and it's not just about happiness, but true joy. What brings light to your life? And if it's the job and you're getting enough out of that, great. But if it's not, go find what actually fuels your fire and fuels your soul, because you're going to be a much better person for it at home, and your family has to come first.
Oh, so well said. So let me ask you something then. As we wrap up our talk, imagining people that are listening to this who are suffering in silence, veterans, all of our first responders, there's somebody listening, they're struggling, they're feeling very hopeless, suffering in silence, don't really believe that they can actually talk to somebody or that it will help. Do you have suggestions? What would that first courageous step be?
I think the easiest thing you can do for yourself is understand gratitude. Gratitude is simple, it's free, but you have to work at it. Understanding what you are grateful for and putting yourself in a position where those things can happen to you. And expressing gratitude towards others will often put you in the position where you feel the gratitude back. Hold the door for somebody in the grocery store. Help them carry their bags out to the car if they look like they need the help. Smile at somebody in the elevator. You don't have to say anything. Just smile at them, because that may be the only smile they got that day. When you're going on an airplane, say thank you to the flight attendants, because you know what? Most people don't. Make other people feel appreciated, and you will be grateful to see the smile that they give you back. It's such an easy way to start. Such an easy way to start. And when you realize that you are making a positive impact in somebody else's life with such a simple act, that's where it begins. And you can start that downward spiral that you were having. You can put a stop to that, and then you can start spiraling back up again.
Really interesting. It's such a simple concept, yet it's so powerful, isn't it? And David, you used to say things about, what was it? Anger and joy in the same part? Like you can't do both at the same time?
Sadness and joy can't really live in the same space.
Okay. And I think we talked over each other. Can you say that again?
Sorry about that. Anger and joy, or sadness and joy, can't truly live in the same space. And if you can find more joy, you'll weed out the anger or the sadness. So if you can seed and fuel and cultivate, think of a garden, fresh grass, and which will be your joyous moments. That fresh grass, as it grows and strengthens, as those joyous moments strengthen, you will weed out the sadness. The sadness still exists. It's still there. And you need to embrace that, and don't let it go away, because it'll fuel the joyous moments. And you'll be able to just push those off to the side, and they're still sad, but they're not running your life. The joyous moments are.
They're like overbearing or overcoming the sadness. They're
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's just like weeds in the garden, right? If you grow fresh grass, it'll push out the weeds.
I just love this. I just feel like what you have shared in this talk is so helpful for somebody who is struggling. And I really appreciate talking to you today, David. I'm so grateful that you're part of this book project. For all those that are listening to this, you can hear more of David's story. It's great. In the Wounds to Wisdom, Healing Through Veteran and First Responder Narratives. And David, it's just really encouraging also to know you. I guess it's been 3 years now in the Power of Our Story, to see the growth and the joy and so many things that you have accomplished since you just kept taking those steps forward. So I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're bringing. Thank you so much.
Well, there's 3 people in my life I couldn't have done it without, and you're one of them. So thank you so much for coming along the journey with me and providing me a path where I can have had that journey. You are such an influential part of where I am today. So I'm grateful for you.
Thank you. It's been an honor, David. Thank you.